This is the scary guy, and I am chatting with Staxx. Staxx, baby.
Welcome to this episode of Chatting with Staxx. I'm your host, Bill Staxx, and today I got this scary guy. What's up, man?
I love the way you say that. First you point a gun at me, and then you shoot a bullet at me, and then you introduce me. I really like that one, Bill. Thanks.
So that's your legal name, the scary guy?
Yeah. I changed my name 30 years ago in a court of law in Tucson, Arizona.
And what's the reason?
It's actually on 2 passports now.
That's a pretty wild name. What's the reason for it?
Well, I got the name when I was a tattoo artist in Tucson, Arizona. I had three tattoo shops in Tucson. I had about 10 artists working for me. And I rode my Harley Davidson to work every day, and I started my work probably about 10 or 11 in the morning. And that's what I thought I'd do for the rest of my life. Because, I'd never in my wildest imagination did I think was going to happen to me. But somebody in a competitive tattoo business, and I never met the guy, he ran a full-page ad in the newspaper. And in fact, on the paper that I used to run the full-page ad on, every month I'd run my own full-page ad on the back of this newspaper magazine and advertising my business. And that one month I decided I didn't want to run the ad, and the owner of the magazine paper, he called me on the phone one day and he said, "Hey, Scary, there's a competitive shop that wants to take the back page of that newspaper and they're going to run an ad on it." And I said, "Well, that's fine, let them do it. I'm not going to stop them." He said, "No, but you wouldn't believe what he's going to print on there." And I said, "What do you mean? What's he going to print?" And he says, "Are you tired of dealing with scary guys with war paint facial tattoos?" That's what he's going to print on the back of the newspaper. And Mark, the guy that owned the paper, he called me up and he says, "Before I run the ad, I wanted to get your permission." And I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "It isn't my paper, number one. And number two, you should run it because it's your paper and you got to make some money. And you know what? I can't stop the guy from talking. That's freedom of speech." So anyway, he ran the ad, but then when he ran the ad and the newspaper came out, we all saw the ad, and it was about me because I was the only tattoo shop owner that had tattoo face at the time. There was a bunch of, maybe 2 or 3 other people that had some tattoos on their face in Tucson in those days. This was back in 94, 95 time frame. And, but I knew it was about me because he was running the ad like that. "Are you tired of dealing with scary guys with war paint facial tattoos?" And I slammed the paper down on the counter and I thought to myself, why would that guy say that about me? I'm a good guy. And that's what I thought about myself. But the first thought that came to my mind, Bill, was what am I going to do to get the guy back? That's the first thing I thought of. Revenge. And I thought, well, I'll just jump in my hot rod Lincoln. I'll find out where that guy lives, and I'll go over to his house and I'll run over his dog. I thought a flat dog ought to get a man's best friend,
Yeah.
And then I thought, no, that's not good enough punishment. I'll jump in my hot rod Lincoln, take my baseball bat, and go over to his house and whack off his kneecaps. And then I thought, nah, that's not me. I'm not a violent guy. I'm a good guy. He's the bad guy. Look what he said about me. But then I stepped up on my pedestal and I started bragging and gloating about how great I was as a human being. And when I was on my pedestal bragging about how great I was as a human, my life started to flash in front of me. And that's when I realized at that exact moment in time, I was a name caller, a hater. I could stereotype and categorize people at will. And I thought, how did I get away with that for this long? And I masked my whole life in sarcasm and humor. I made everything that I ever said in my whole life, if it was negative, I made it look positive by laughing at it all the time. So I realized at that exact moment in time, I was just like the guy, I just didn't use newspapers yet. And I was kind of like irritated by the idea that this is how I was as a human being. And that woke me up at that exact moment in time. And I said, well, I'm not going to do this. I got to figure out how I'm going to change my life. And I told all my friends I'm packing my bags. And they said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to travel the world to help people see each other differently from the inside out. And they said, how are you going to do that? And I said, I haven't got a clue, but I can tell you one thing, though. And they said, what's that? I think I just wasted 43 years of my life running my mouth, calling myself a good guy. And that's how I got the name. So I legally changed it because at that exact moment in my life, I realized that's who I really was. And I lived 43 years running my mouth, calling myself okay. And so then I started speaking and I changed my name. And that was really weird. When I changed my name, I went and filed at the courthouse, and they have to go before a judge, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And there were 300 people in the courtroom because you have to file for the name change. And there were 300 people. The courtroom was full, and the media was outside the door. And the judge wouldn't let the media in the courtroom. And so she calls me up to the bench, and she says, I see you want to change your name to the scary guy. And I said, yeah. She said, well, it's really an unusual name. And I said, well, there's a reason for it, and she says, okay, well, are you trying to hide or elude any debtors or creditors or anything like that? I said, look at me, Judge. I said, I can't hide. And of course, she laughed. She laughed at me at that. And the judges usually don't laugh too much in court, but she thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, she grabbed her gavel and she slammed it down on the counter and said, I'm the most unusual name change. I'm going to grant it for you. And so she did. Well, when I walked out the courtroom, I'm not lying, every newspaper, every television station, everybody in the world was there to ask me questions about who this strange dude was that had tattoos all over his body and his face. Why would he want to change his name to the scary guy? Well, that was the start of my journey. So at that exact moment in time, I had to figure out, what am I going to do to make my life different instead of running my mouth full time? And so I started looking around the room, who could I model myself after? Who does it a different way than I do it? I see myself as a tough guy and somebody that can take care of business when I need to. And running my mouth was part of being that whole person. So if I was about to change, how could I do that? So I started looking around, and I looked at my father, and I looked at my dad as a role model, and I went, oh, I don't know about this one. He was a Navy veteran, World War II, and he never spoke. He was always angry, and every time I walked around him as a kid, I walked on eggshells. His whole philosophy were kids were to be seen, not heard. I don't know if you ever heard that one before.
Of course.
And I went, oh, well, I don't know if that's a very good role model. My dad never looked down on me and called me his son. He never even told me he loved me. Not one time in my lifetime did he ever do that. So I thought, okay, well, he's not a good role model to figure out how I'm going to live a different life. So then I looked at my mom. She was the next in line, and my mom lived to 63 years old. And I went, wait a minute. I don't think I've ever heard my mom say one rotten, negative, derogatory word about a human being her entire life. And I thought, oh my God, this woman, my mom, was unbelievable. And I thought, if she can do it, I can do it. And so I created a challenge for myself. I put myself on a 7-day, 7-night challenge. And I said, I'm going to make it 7 days and 7 nights, because I know on the 8th day, if I don't like how I feel, I'm going to go back to my old ways.
That's what I said when I was on. I was like, if I don't like being sober, I'm just going to go back.
Yeah, exactly. So I said, for 7 days, 7 nights, don't say one negative word about another human on the planet. And for 7 days, 7 nights, don't call another person a name other than their own. And I said, okay, I'm going to put myself on that challenge. I created it for me to change how I saw everybody else around me. Well, I started on the challenge, and I have to be really honest with you, straightforward. That was the most quiet week of my entire life. There isn't anything that came out of my mouth, because every time I thought about saying something, it was about putting somebody down or making fun of them or something derogatory or something sarcastic. And I thought, and then my friends went, what's wrong with you? You're not even talking anymore. You're just quiet. I said, I put myself on a challenge, and if I'm afraid if I open my mouth, I'm going to break my challenge. So I was feeling these unbelievable withdrawal. You know, I was just feeling really withdrawn from everybody. But what I learned is I figured it out. I figured out for myself what was really going on. I was being used by everybody's negative words and its energy, and I was reacting to everything full time. And I didn't even realize it till I put myself on a challenge. Everybody thinks the challenge is about being a good person, and that could be a benefit. No, I want to know, what are you doing with what you're hearing? Are you simply taking it on right here, reformatting it, and then regurgitating it out of your mouth, and then calling yours okay? You call it good, even though it was a negative response or reaction to somebody else's negative. And so that's how I was living my life for 43 years. And when I got to the seventh day, I looked at my life in the eighth day, and I went, well, I can tell you right now, I was really quiet, but I got to figure out how to interact with people differently. And the other thing was, I felt better, physically felt better. Unbelievable when you're not putting that negative out. You don't realize how much negative I was receiving and how much negative I was putting out. I had no idea until this happened.
So if you did it, you'd have to start all over, right?
Yeah, well, if I tell people this today, I got teachers on the challenge in the world that if they break the challenge, like let's say they make a mistake on the third or fourth day, and you're going to hear that mistake, there's no doubt about it. If you make a mistake, you got to start over on day one. So I've got teachers that have been on the challenge for 10 years because they can't get 7 days in a row.
Wow.
You know, I've been on the challenge for 30 years, and I got to tell you, if you go on a challenge and your listeners go on a challenge, mistakes are okay. You make a mistake, you start over on day one. Don't find fault with yourself, and don't get down on yourself. It's really hard. Everybody thinks it's simple, but it's very, very difficult.
You're sitting in an art studio right now.
Yeah, I'm in my art gallery, and my wife and I, we bought this building in the middle of Wigan Town Center, which is in the United Kingdom. And we bought it because her mom was 80 years old. We had a house or a cottage in Wales. And I said to her one day, my wife is British here, and I said to her, your mom's getting up there in age and she's having a hard time moving around. We better think about doing something for her. And so she sold her cottage, and we went and found this building in the town center because this is where she grew up in this area. And Barbara was her mother, and she had a house near here, and she sold her house, and we built the building, and we built the house for her on the first floor. It's 4 stories high. And we live and sleep on the top floor, and then the first floor was Barbara's apartments. And she passed away last year, and she had Parkinson's. But we took care of her the last 4 years of her life. So that's why we're in Wigan. Otherwise, who knows? You know, I might be somewhere else because I'm not really tied. I wasn't really tied down too much. You know, I could travel, and I did a lot of traveling, and I still do a lot of traveling. I get booked by people all over the world to talk about how to go from a reactionary thinking, which is how I was raised, and most people are raised that way, to react to whatever they see and hear, because most of it they believe belongs to them. I can tell you for a fact, I've talked to millions of people in the last 30 years, and I take a survey of kids from age 0 or 1, all the way to 25. And typically, if I ask them a question, if I call you a rotten word, who's that rotten word about? I ask them that question. And 99.9% of them will say, well, it's about me. You told me. You gave it to me. So they believe everything they see and hear is about them. And that's pretty much a guarantee. Now, when they get to about 26, 27, 28 years old, they've been told by older people, no, they're the ones with the big mouth and they got a problem. So they all of a sudden start shifting their dialogue, but that doesn't mean they don't take on the words or the energy. Then they get full of this negative, and then they walk around with all this stress in their body full time. So they don't know what to do with it. So I show people how to go from a reactionary learned behavior to a responsive one and break that cycle of abuse that they learned their whole life. You know what I mean? And of course it plays out in different ways. So I get hired by schools, I get hired by government agencies. One of the most interesting trainings I ever did was 35 psychiatrists in Germany. And I trained them how to deal with teenagers that self-harm. It's bizarre to me too, but that's what I went from tattooing in Tucson, Arizona to Germany teaching psychiatrists on how to deal with teenagers. That's just, it's like, to me, that's just incredibly weird. And, but that's been my life. I worked with the United States Air Force and all of Europe under General Fogelsong when he was in charge of the Air Force in Europe. I worked with the troops there, and I had a meeting with General Fogelsong in Germany. One of the most interesting times that I ever had was at Boulder, Colorado. I was invited to work with 4,000 Air Force cadets and train them. So,
So were you in the military at one point?
No.
Never.
No, I was never in the military, but the military hires me, and that's what's funny about it. And then I get hired by law enforcement all over the world too. I've done training here at Dorset Police in England. I trained the Dorset Police. They went through my training. That was quite enlightening.
How do you go from the U.S. to England? Like, how does your journey bring you there?
Well, that's a good story. That's a good question, because I was just doing my thing in the United States. I sold my businesses, changed my life, and the media kind of was my marketing arm, because they kept doing stories about who I am, and in my change, I started getting recognized for working with kids in schools in the local area in Tucson. So I got a reputation giving kids a story about, you don't have to be negative, you can change how you are, and it's possible to do that. And I would show them how to do that. So I started getting, and they started writing newspaper stories about me and doing interviews on TV. And then I'm not talking about just a couple. I'm talking about, 1,500 stories.
Do you think it was your tattoos and the name?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. See, I was kind of like a borderline freak show, but not really a freak show,
Yeah.
Because they were going, hey, who is this guy talking like this? But that talk doesn't fit.
Yeah.
That talk doesn't fit his face, He should be doing he's doing something weird rather than making sense and making common sense about people and their behavior, And so I got a lot of phone calls, and then that spread across the world. It wasn't just the U.S. And so a guy by the name of Gary Lee, he had a radio show out of London, and he heard about me, and he said, in his thinking, he said, well, what is this gimmick? What is this scam all about? I'm going to find out what's really behind this scamster. I'm going to call him up, email him, and see if he wants to be on my show. So anyway, he's in London, and he gets a hold of me, and he schedules a time for me to be on his show, and he starts talking to me, and we have this conversation about emotional intelligence, and he goes, well, this is really something. Hey, can I have you on in 2 weeks after I do the challenge? I said, sure. So he books me again, and 2 weeks later, we have another conversation. He's blown away. He says, how come you never come to England? And I looked at him and I said, I don't go anywhere I'm not invited.